biology and health and medicine used to be hit or miss. We would just find things accidentally. So progress was linear. That was still useful. Life expectancy was 19 1,000 years ago. It was 37 200 years ago. But the progress was linear because we would just find things accidentally. Now we're actually treating our biology as software, which is fundamentally what it is. And the Genome Project, which was the enabling factor for this, was itself exponential. The amount of data we sequenced doubled every year. The cost came down by half every year. Halfway through the Genome Project, which was set to be a 15-year project, only 1% of the genome had been collected. So mainstream scientists declared it a failure, saying, okay, 7 years, 1%, it's going to take 700 years, just like we said. My reaction at the time was, oh, we finished 1%, we're almost done, because 1% is only 7 doublings from 100%. And indeed, 7 years later, the project was finished. And these technologies today are now 1,000 times more powerful than they were a decade ago when the Genome Project was completed. And it's not just sequencing the data. We can actually change this outdated software that runs in our bodies. And these ideas are now entering clinical practice. For example, if you have a heart attack, you have a 50% chance of having your heart damaged. Today, that can be fixed by reprogramming adult stem cells to rejuvenate the heart. And if we had more time, I could give you many more examples. But 10 years from now, these technologies will again be 1,000 times more powerful than they are today. They're being assisted by computers that are also doubling in power every year. And it will be a very different era. We're going to be able to dramatically extend human life starting in about 10 years from the exponential growth of biology. Already print out human organs. There was a girl who actually had a damaged windpipe, and they scanned her throat. They designed, using the computer, a new windpipe for her, printed it out with biodegradable materials using a 3D printer, then grew out a new windpipe for her using stem cells, and installed it surgically, and it worked just fine. We can also do that with more complicated organs like kidneys in animals, and soon that will be done in humans. Ultimately, we'll be able to print out human organs and all the other things that we need in life. And these technologies are going to go inside our bodies. They're already very close to us. When I was a student at MIT, I had to ride my bicycle across campus to get to the one computer that all the students shared. Today, we carry them around on our belts or in our pockets. They're on our wrists. They will ultimately go inside our bodies. One idea is to actually have little robots the size of blood cells to basically augment the human immune system. We have these little devices. They're natural. They're called T cells. It's our immune system that fights disease. But it evolved thousands of years ago when it really was not in the interest of the human species to live very long. So, for example, our immune system doesn't work against cancer. It thinks that's you. Ultimately, we can create a device just like the immune system, but that is programmed against all types of pathogens. So it could destroy cancer, it could destroy retroviruses, which our immune system doesn't work on, and really finish the process of the immune system. Also, they will go inside our brains and put our brain directly on the internet. We have a limited capacity in our neocortex, which is where we do our thinking. So, I mentioned that this is thousands of times more powerful than the computer that all of MIT shared when I was an undergraduate there. But that's not even the most interesting thing about it. If I need 10,000 computers, I can access it in the cloud. So we can multiply the devices we carry around with cloud computing. But we can't do that yet with our brains. Ultimately, we will directly connect our brains to the cloud and expand our thinking. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I've been thinking about thinking for about 50 years. I wrote a paper as a high school student as to how I thought the neocortex works, which is the part of the brain where we do our thinking. And I got to meet President Johnson, and that started me on thinking about how the brain worked. Today, we have a lot of neuroscience evidence that confirms the thesis I had 50 years ago. And I'm actually working now on trying to implement a synthetic neocortex, and ultimately we'll be able to connect to that directly from our brains. That's a 2030s scenario. So, and our information about the brain is also increasing exponentially. The spatial resolution, the precision of non-invasive brain scanning, being able to see inside the brain, is doubling every year. The amount of information we're getting about how the brain works is doubling every year. In this book, I have a model of how I believe the neocortex works. It's a hierarchical system, and can't describe all of these slides in the time we have, but let me describe briefly how it works. We have 300 million modules in our neocortex, and they deal with patterns. They can detect a pattern, identify it, remember it, recognize that pattern when it sees it again, and these little pattern modules are organized in hierarchies, and our brain creates that hierarchy from its own thinking. So that very quickly is a summary of how the neocortex works. So I'll give you a simple example. These are English letters. So I have modules in my neocortex that can recognize the crossbar to a capital A. And that goes up to a higher level, and at that higher level it can recognize a capital A. That goes up to a higher level that might say the word apple. Information floats down also. If the Apple recognizer has seen A, P, P, L, but has not seen E, it will send a signal down to all the E recognizers saying, well, I think an E is on its way, be on the outlook for it. The E recognizers will lower their recognition threshold, and if they see something sloppy, could be an E, ordinarily wouldn't think so, but we're expecting an E, so it says, yes, I've seen an E, it's good enough, and says, yes, we've seen E, and then Apple says, yes, we've seen Apple. So information goes up and down in the hierarchy in this way. Go up another 5 levels, you're now at a very high level of the hierarchy. The hierarchy now stretches into the different senses. So there could be a module that sees a certain fabric, smells a certain perfume, hears a certain voice quality, and says, oh, my wife has entered the room. Go up another 10 levels, and you're now at a very abstract level of the hierarchy. And you may have modules that say, that was funny, that was ironic, she's pretty. And you might think that those are more complicated, but actually they're the same. It's the hierarchy below them that's more complicated. A very good example of this, there was a girl who was having brain surgery, and she was conscious and talking to the surgeons. You can do that because there's no pain receptors in the brain, and they wanted to talk to her. So whenever they stimulated these points in red, she would start to laugh. So at first they thought that they're triggering some kind of laugh reflex, but they quickly realized that no, they were actually triggering the perception of humor. She found everything very funny whenever they stimulated these points. You guys are so funny just standing there was a typical comment. They had found the points in their neocortex which were at the top of this hierarchy that actually recognized humor. You may have heard of the IBM computer Watson that won this American TV game called Jeopardy! Now, people tend to dismiss artificial intelligence saying, oh, it only deals with very narrow capabilities. But Jeopardy! Is actually a very broad game. It deals with very subtle forms of language, humor and irony and puns and riddles, and it deals with all of human knowledge. So for example, Watson, the IBM computer, got this query correct. It was in the rhyme category. A long, tiresome speech delivered by a frothy pie topping. And Watson quickly said, what is a meringue harangue? Which is the correct answer. The humans didn't get that. It's a pretty difficult question, really showing the sophistication of being able to deal with language in a computer. And Watson got its knowledge not by being hand-coded by the engineers, but actually by reading all of Wikipedia and several other encyclopedias, difficult natural language documents, 200 million documents in all. And it's a good example of the state of the art in artificial intelligence. So my vision, my calculation is by 2029, we will have enough information about the brain, computers will be powerful enough that we can actually achieve human levels of intelligence, pass what's called the Turing test, where computers are indistinguishable from humans in terms of human levels of intelligence. And what we'll do then in the 2030s is we will actually merge with these computers. We'll have nanobots, which, as I mentioned, will be augmenting the immune system, but they'll also go inside the brain and basically put our brain on the cloud. So I have 300 million modules, but if I'm walking along and I see somebody important and I have to think of something clever to say and I've got 2 seconds to do it, and my 300 million modules in my brain is not going to be enough, I can actually access billions more in the cloud, just the way you can access billions of computers in the cloud from your smartphone. And the basis of this has already been demonstrated, but this will be a routine technology in the 2030s. And this is my idea of how we will apply artificial intelligence. We're going to merge with it and make ourselves smarter. Technology has always been something that enables us to go beyond our limitations. 1,000 years ago, we couldn't reach that fruit at that higher branch, so we invented a tool that extended our physical reach. And then we invented tools that enabled us to build grand structures like the pyramids. And then we invented computers so that we could remember things effortlessly. And we now have access to all of human knowledge with a few keystrokes. And ultimately, we will very literally expand the size of our brains in the cloud. And that's my vision of how we will use these technologies. I think that will also keep these technologies safe, because it's not, you see a lot of movies where there's one person that has the artificial intelligence and threatens the world. It's not going to be like that. Artificial intelligence is not in 1 or 2 hands. It's already in 1 or 2 billion hands, and will be in everybody's hands, within a decade. So there's controversy as to whether these technologies are helping or hurting the world, and people look at very short-term impacts. But if you look at the broad scale of technology and read about what human life was like a few centuries ago, when life expectancy was 37, 200 years ago, and life was very, very hard and filled with disease and poverty, we've come a long way. I'll just show you one graph of the impact of these technologies over the last 200 years. These are all countries, these little circles. The x-axis is income per person, wealth, in today's dollars. On the y-axis, you have human longevity in years. So this is 1800. Human longevity was in the 20s and 30s, worldwide average 37. Income per person was in hundreds of dollars per year of today's dollars. So what happened over the last 200 years? Well, there was the Industrial Revolution, started in England, and the textile industry. A few countries were experimenting with it. But if you look at what happens in the 1900s, there's a wind that carries all of these countries towards the upper right-hand corner of the graph, towards greater wealth and greater health. And I have other charts like this showing education and other parameters of human well-being. And at the end of this process, there's still a have-not divide, but at the end of this process, the countries that are worst off are far better than the countries that were best off at the beginning of this process. And I shouldn't say end of the process, because the process isn't ending. This is going to go into high gear as we get to the more mature phases of the biotechnology revolution, the three-dimensional printing revolution, and so on. And we've made great gains in education. We've actually tripled the amount of education a child gets in the developing world, doubled it in the developed world over the last half-century. We're making fantastic progress in energy. Solar energy is doubling every 2 years, and it's now only 6 doublings from 100%, which means it's now 2% of the world's energy. So people say, 2%, that's not very important, ignoring the exponential growth. Just the way they ignored the exponential growth in the internet when it was 1%, or the Genome Project when it was 1%. 12 years from now, there's going to be another 6 doublings that will achieve 100%. According to Deutsche Bank, we're only 2 years away from the cost of solar energy being equal or less to the cost of getting energy from fossil fuels. And China is the world leader in solar energy because it sees the potential for this to be quite revolutionary. And ultimately, this will be very inexpensive. And here's the progress we made before health and medicine was an information technology. This is the linear growth of health and medicine. So we've multiplied by 4 life expectancy in the last 1,000 years. We've doubled it in 200 years. But this is going to go into high gear very soon. 10, 20 years from now, it's going to be a whole different era in human longevity as we begin to master the information processes that underlie biology and health at an exponential rate. According to my models, 15 years from now or less, we will be adding more than a year every year to your remaining life expectancy. So as you go forward a year, your life expectancy will move on away from you. So if you can hang in there for another 10, 15 years, we may get to see the remarkable century ahead. Thank you very much.